What's going on, everybody? It's the Reformation Keegan, and I'm here today with a new comic analysis from an English major's point of view. If you are new to the channel, welcome. I basically analyze comics from my learnings as a former honors and now current master's student in the English department. And for people that are returning, thank you, because your viewership means a lot, your subscriptions mean a lot, and your interaction means a lot. Today, we're going to be looking at Superman, The Last Days of Lex Luthor. And this is actually book one from 2023, and it took almost 2 full years to get this done due to other commitments that the authors had. I believe Hitch had some commitments that he was doing, and I believe that issue 2 was supposed to be out in September of 2023, but it didn't come out until March of this year. So quite a long time. And this issue actually came out while I was gone away training for wrestling. This came out a couple days before I actually returned home. So I was a little late to getting it, but I got it. And one of the things that I didn't do was read it right away. And it's something that I learned from being a student in English, is that if you have a series of books that you're reading and you read the first book way too early, you're not going to be able to have as much retention of it going forward. And when you read the second, third, fourth, fifth installments, your memory of the first book is going to be really hazy, for lack of a better term. So I waited to read this until eventually all 3 of the issues came out, which they came out in March and April of this year. And first of all, the cover looks great. I really like the cover. And I'm not going to go through all 3 books because they are pretty long in length for comics, both literally and also from a vantage point of looking at the pictures as well and the illustrations. It took a little while to read this compared to the other comics because, again, the layout's different, a lot more dialogue than usual, so it takes a little bit longer. So I'm not going to go through all of that, but I want to look specifically at characterization. And I believe that Mark Waid is perfect when it comes to characterization. And if you are looking at any Mark Waid titles, I don't think you need to really contemplate. I would probably just buy them because everything that I have read from Mark Waid is completely and utterly amazing. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. But characterization, I want to look at Lex and obviously Clark, and I want to analyze them a little bit. So I have some notes with me because there's always a lot to talk about, and it never hurts to look at your notes if you're ever doing a conference or doing a conference paper or you're still a student. Do not let people intimidate you into not using notes. You can. You just have to know how to use them sparingly and not always look down at your paper. And you need to have your dialogue that you're speaking to with your audience match what you are currently looking at, because then you can fumble your thoughts. So just wanted to get that out of the way quickly. But anyway, Superman Last Days of Lex Luthor, characterization is the number one theme here that I think we need to discuss. And I want to start with Lex because Lex is an extremely complex character. And from what I know of Lex in general, is there's a narcissism to him that I think every author should always exploit. Even if you're watching Smallville, which I currently am right now, Lex is so far a little more lighthearted but still devious at heart in ways that are difficult to explain. But you know when you know somebody and they're helping you right now, but you never know when they can turn on you, and you never know what their self-interests are. That's basically what Lex is in Smallville. And Lex in The Last Days of Lex Luthor is similar to that, except he's a little more blatant. So at this point in the canon, Lex and Superman are already having their proverbial beef, and they are already feuding, which means that he already knows a lot of what makes clock tick. And Lex is dying, and we find out that he's dying due to explosion with kryptonite. So specifically, what happens is the radiation from this explosion gets onto his skin, and it starts aging him rapidly, and he's dying. And he needs to go to Clark for help. Similarly, like how to rationalize how Clark goes to Lex in Smallville for help all the time, the roles are reversed. And Lex is going to Clark for help because he knows that Clark may be the only one that would know what to do in this current situation. Which, again, is really good for characterization, because when does Lex ever want help from anybody? Unless if it's to take down Clark and then turn on them later so he can take all the credit for taking down Clark. So a nice little characterization there that I think that Mark Waid implements perfectly. And he goes to Clark for help, and he's like, hey, you got a minute? And then he tells him that he's dying. And the whole time, throughout this entire story, Clark has in the back of his mind that this is all a trap and that Lex is betraying him, because you never know with a character like Lex what you're going to get. And this was interesting because when you're characterizing somebody that you know that you can never trust, you always have to have that suspense in your prose, and that's what Mark Waid does here perfectly. And he does it really good in issue 1, where he goes back to their childhoods when Clark and Lex are actually friends. And you can kind of see why Lex is having this issue over trust, and why Clark's having this issue over trust. It's because when they were younger, they both had trust issues. And Lex felt that he was the most misunderstood person in the entire world, maybe to the point that he wasn't even human. Which is interesting because Lex grows to hate Smallville. And he grows to hate Smallville due to this lack of understanding. And this lack of understanding is really evident in a scene with Mr. Hubbard when Lex is scouting all of his movements with the tractor and what the tractor means to him and what the tractor can negatively contribute to the society around Mr. Hubbard. And it's really intriguing because you can see how Lex is inspecting this tractor, and he wants the world to not run off of pollution, and he knows that the tractor is causing a lot of pollution in Smallville in this current location. But Mr. Hubbard doesn't see it that way. He doesn't want his tractor ran off of solar power, but Lex says, albeit sarcastically, fine, let the world run on pollution and keep polluting the environment. The problem is Lex's heart is in the right place, but Clark mentions that it's Lex's attitude in his presentation to people is what basically turns them off. And what Mark Waid really does well in his prose here is he characterizes Lex as somebody who wants, he's somebody that really wants to help, but at the same time, it's for his self-serving motivation. He wants to get rid of this pollution to say that he did it. And that's a really unique point of view that a lot of people actually have in the world, even today. It's just they don't show it. So I thought that perception from Mark Waid was really, really accurate. And there's a lot of other really unique points in this story that I think are super well done with the characterization of Lex, because you have to see Lex in a point of vulnerability, having to trust somebody else, which is pretty uncommon. And he ends up taking Lex to the Fortress of Solitude, which is pretty unprecedented at this point. And he also takes him to the Phantom Zone. So we can see in the Phantom Zone, Lex's true colors start to come out because General Zod is there, and he's forming his own little army to still try to take down Clark. And Lex is only protecting Clark because he knows that he needs him, but he asks for a rain check with Zod about taking Clark down. So that was a really intriguing, suspenseful point that you would use in a climax of a story to show the character's true colors, even though they still need the other person that they're feuding against for their own self-serving motivation. Really well done, really well written. And when you get to the other issues, you can see that it's still pretty omnipresent at this point. Lex also, he takes offense in a way to not being the smartest person or entity that Clark would know. And Clark tells him that because Lex gets a little bit annoyed that he basically gets a silver medal in the wisdom department compared to the other person that Clark knows is smarter than Lex. And the only thing, I guess we can call it, would be Brainiac. Because Brainiac is just pure knowledge, and it's really hard for a living mammal to go against artificial intelligence when it comes to data and when it comes to knowledge on rather unemotional objects. So that's the only way that Lex is getting beaten in the wisdom department. or so we think. So I really like this little banter of back and forth between Clark and Lex. I think it adds a lot of intrigue. Not too much comedy because you don't want Clark being the comic relief of a story, but Lex throughout his sarcasm serves as that, and we can see it when he takes Lex to the Fortress of Solitude and to New Kandor inside the bottle, and Lex goes, "Oh, geez, I hope they have some commemorative keychains here." Because Clark tells him that he's never brought anybody there before. So that was again a little piece of small humor that you use in a rather serious story when somebody is dying, because you don't want your whole narrative from an English major's point of view to just be pure negativity, because that can be very off-putting. But when you add a little bit of dramatic comedy into there, I think that's what makes a story compelling, because there's lighthearted spots in a whole realm of darkness, for lack of a better term. So Mark Waid's incorporation of small comedy throughout sarcasm really, really helps make this story a little more eventful, because if it was just about Lex dying, even though a lot of people, including Wonder Woman in this, would think that Lex is just getting what he deserves, it can still be, for a casual audience and even a younger audience, a little bit too dark, which personally I don't mind, but for a lot of other people, you would want to have a little bit of that lighthearted effect throughout the bickering, for lack of a better word, because really that's what Lex and Clark do. Even if you look at Smallville, they bicker, and if you look in the comics, they usually bicker, especially when they need each other, like this. So it's a nice little continuity there that Mark Waid also puts forth. And the other thing is too, with a little bit of comedy, when we see Clark take Lex to Diana, because there's a purple ray in her area of residence that could potentially cure Lex. Lex says that he hates magic after witnessing Diana, but then he remembers, oh, well, magic is kind of a weakness of Clark. No, wait, I love magic. Little bit of comedy like that goes a long way in a darker story. So again, that was the second example I was looking for. And Clark also reveals his secret to Lex. Again, this is very intriguing. I usually like when Lex discovers things, but I think because he's dying, it fits here for Clark to reveal the secret a bit. And then right after this, Clark claims that Lex's hatred for Smallville was so deep that it blinded basically the secret. So like the phrase or the term when somebody says they're blinded by hatred? That's what happens here. So Lex is so blinded by his hatred for Smallville that he doesn't see, with all of his gifts and all of his wisdom, what's right in front of him, knowing that Clark is Superman. And to most other people, even from a perspective of dramatic irony, it's pretty obvious, except for maybe the twirl of the hair, in the suit. It's pretty obvious that Clark is Superman when he's always disappearing and he's never where he needs to be. And then all of a sudden he's conveniently back after all the carnage ensues. Really fitting. You would think for someone of Lex's intelligence level and IQ that he would be able to spot that right away. But hatred blinded him from that. And that's a really good piece that Mark Waid uses here in this story. Because you don't just want somebody that's purely intelligent, because then it kind of limits their scope and it limits their range as a character, unless if you're Brainiac, of course. But for human beings, when you just give them that pure intelligence level with no weaknesses, it not only makes it boring, but it doesn't make it necessarily relatable. Every human being has their little flaw, and basically Lex's hatred is his flaw, and also his arrogance. But the blindness of the of not just the upcoming betrayal that Clark thinks is going to happen, is it basically shows the blindness of betrayal in a way where Clark also not necessarily becomes a hypocrite, but he becomes blinded by hatred too right after he says this, because he thinks that Lex betrayed him at the end of the second book. And it's revealing because like Clark starts wailing on him, and that's very unlike Clark to get that aggressive. So right after, I think this is a sense of irony that you would use in literature, where you have Clark call out Lex for his hatred, and then immediately after he thinks Lex betrays him. So then he ends up unleashing his hatred of Lex on Lex, and Clark usually doesn't have hatred, but in this moment of rage he does, which is relatable because anybody in a moment of rage could probably do anything. And that's what Lex does here. But then we find out that Brainiac is the one that actually caused Lex's issues pertaining to death, which again adds further complexity going forward, because Brainiac is responsible for Clark temporarily losing his powers at this point, and also for Lex's impending death and illness. And Lex basically puts a device together that is going to cost him his own life. And I like sometimes that we don't know necessarily everything that Lex knows, because is Lex doing this for himself to be a revered hero, or does he know he's not going to actually die and this is all a ruse? We kind of find out near the conclusion a little bit, but still Lex is Lex. And that is the point that that this video is trying to make, is you can never trust Lex, even when he's at his most weakest point and about 2 seconds away from dying. But what I liked about this third part was he transforms the sun's energy because Brainiac takes all of the sun's energy and makes it into his own power, which is very dangerous. And that's one of the reasons why Brainiac is a major problem, because he can take the sun's energy and combine it and transmute it into knowledge. And that is very deadly for humanity. And Brainiac's death trap, according to Lex, is going to reverse itself, and it's going to cause Clark's cells to basically return and be even stronger, and his powers are going to return to normal while Lex basically dies. So Clark's sacrifice in this story is that he has to trust Lex, and he has to come to terms with the fact that somebody might die, because we know that Superman doesn't kill, but Lex dying is what's going to basically save humanity at this point. And Clark doesn't think in numbers. Lex thinks in numbers. So Lex in this book looks at the math and says one death compared to a whole bunch, it doesn't matter. Whereas Clark doesn't think anybody should die, especially if he has control of it. And that's the one thing, is Clark needs to be in control if somebody is near death, because he knows he can save them. And it will eat Clark alive if he knows he could have saved somebody and they died and he was responsible. So he does everything he can to not let Lex die. But eventually they combine the power together. Clark does get all his powers back, and he finds that Lex is alive after this. And what happens is Clark uses his own intelligence to basically not outsmart Lex, but to not even trick him into believing that he was going to die. But he uses his own agency to take the risk and be like, okay, I think I can get Lex to survive while also saving humanity. So Clark uses his own intuition and his own intellect to save the day, which again is a challenge to Lex, but also now he has his life and he's back to normal. So Clark, like I said, Clark's ultimate sacrifice, and when you're looking at this from a hero's perspective, a hero's ultimate sacrifice is coming to terms of not being in full control of saving the world, but saving what they can save. And that's what Clark does in this story. So ultimately, I thought this book, again, was absolutely amazing. And Brainiac almost made Clark and Lex friends again, and that drove Lex nuts. And I really like that point as well, because Lex and Clark had to work together. And Lex hated it, but he also knew he had to do it, because what other choice did he have at this point? So I thought this book was super, super well written. And I thought Mark Waid did a great job, as he always does. And I would love to see more stories like this happen, because they stick to the Superman canon. They're very relatable, and they give you a story that is not passé, but it's old school. And you can take that old school aspect of it and you can update it and make it into something like The Last Days of Lex Luthor, where Lex is, it's still a Superman story, but Lex is the main focal point. And Clark is also a main focal point, but it's also about somebody else who is in the limelight and needs to have that attention on them. Because then that way, when you look forward to the canon in the future, it's going to show that Lex is not only Superman's top adversary to the casual viewer, but it's going to also show that there is more range to the Superman character than the casual viewer will know, because Superman has a lot of preconceived notions, which is unfortunate, because I think he's the greatest. But that's basically it. Let me know what you guys think. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And most of all, have a good day. Take care.